Today we're going to finish up our interview with Steve B. Stick around. So what do you think catches people the quickest when they hear a song that just first comes out? And I've heard other engineers being interviewed on Pensado's Place talk about this sometimes. What catches people the quickest? Is it the groove? Is it the melody? Is it the harmonies? Is it the instrumentation? What do you keep in mind? I mean, I'm sure it's a little of everything, but what is something that, do you have any advice on that if you're a mixing engineer?
Well, I mean, it's different on, yeah, so if we're asking on the mixing engineer side.
Yeah.
Okay, on the
well, actually, no, let's give it to me on both sides, if you don't mind, what you think about from the production side as well.
Yeah, on the production side, I have to say that groove, groove and melody is where it's all at, right? That's groove and melody is where you're gonna really hook the you're really gonna hook the listener. Michael Jackson was like the king of it. It was just Michael Jackson groove and that melody was like, wow, how could you not be hooked to that, right? And it didn't matter who you were.
Absolutely.
You might have loved Metallica at the time, but you're gonna be like, you know what? Billie Jean.
That's how I feel a lot about a lot of Taylor Swift songs, that her new stuff that comes out. I think, dang it, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, but man, I want to hear that song again. And I think that's such a testament to, go ahead.
Yeah, you and I aren't teenage girls, so we're not really identifying with Taylor Swift lyrics.
Right. It's not even. I'm not even listening to him. In fact, I don't even.
But what we do identify with is just the really good groove and the melody that she's laying down, and it tends to be great melodies with great groove. So on the production side, that's where I say it's at.
Okay.
Now, so on the mixing side, it's a little different to me. It's that's where I always tell people that on mixing is like 99% balance. It's balancing everything, making sure everything everything feels right. If you look at most of my mixes, you'll see compared to a lot of people, you'll see very few plugins or whatever if we're doing it all in the box. Back in the day, it was outboard gear, and even then, I was using very little outboard gear. But what I was relying heavy on was blends. And, I keep on saying his name because he's just one of my more influential dudes. But Dave Way taught me that. And
okay.
He was one of the guys that would let me set up a mix before he got into the room. And he's like, "Hey, Steve, I know we got a mix it today. Go ahead and set it up." And he would come in, and then I would have a basic blend. And it would only be just a blend. I wouldn't touch any of the EQs. I wouldn't touch any of the compressors. I wouldn't do anything. Just be a basic blend of things. And
when you say a blend, are you just talking about the levels against each other?
Exactly. Just levels. Only fader only. So only the comparison of fader levels are. So I would just do that. And Dave would come in and he would be like, "Yeah, that's a pretty good starting point." And then from there, he would do what I would call whittling. Much like, a guy with a stick and a knife, and he'd be sitting on the porch and whittling away, right? Dave Way would whittle away from, EQ and compression, and maybe a little small effects here and there. But next thing I know, Dave Way would get this amazing masterpiece of a mix. And watching him do that is where I realized that, really where the magic of the mix comes from is from the blend, and realizing where in relationships everything should happen to each other. And it's not about putting 20 things on every 20 pieces of outboard gear or 20 inserts on a plugins on an insert, whatever, on everything. Mm-hmm. It's just realizing how does that fit in the puzzle. And he was so genius at it, and I try to take that approach with most of my mixes. Like people always ask me, "How do you get your kick drums to sound so big?" I tell them it's pretty easy. I turn them up louder than everything else in the mix. I'm not doing anything.
You carve around them, huh?
Yeah, I'm not doing anything really genius with the EQs. I'm not doing some sort of side chain, EQing or compression with sometimes I do, but I mean, it's not really relying on that. It's just really, it's levels, it's getting the levels right. And that's what I think that's where I feel the magic's at. You know what I mean? It's as a mixer.
That is gold right there. That is gold. Okay. So let me ask you a question. Let's say I'm a producer. In fact, I'm actually working on a song right now for Crystal. And I like my instruments. It sounds great. This is kind of more of a ballad type song. But I keep thinking it's too sparse. I keep thinking it's just too sparse. And then I keep thinking, is it sparse or does it just need to be mixed really well? Do you ever get mixes from people that is very kind of bare bones? Just, you've got a couple drums and a couple instruments and a voice, and you've got to kind of fill in the frequency range using effects or EQ or whatever. Do you ever have that challenge?
I definitely do. In fact, if you actually today, oddly enough, I just posted a mix from this guy called One Lone Boy on my page on nextlevelmastering.com, or actually Next Level Mastering on the Facebook. I posted this mix.
Oh, I'll check it out.
It's just two guitars, right? It's he overdubbed himself on guitar, so it's an acoustic guitar on left and right, and him singing, and he's got a couple of background vocals. Not really much, but to make that sound full and big. And, I did use EQ, compression, to make sure that it sounded the way it's supposed to sound, to where you're not, wow, that's, nothing else is needed here. All you needed was these two guitars vocal. And it sounds very full in your speakers. You listen to it and it's like, wow, that's, and I'm not trying to brag. Sounds like I am.
No, I'm jealous, man. That sounds like such an amazing skill, and I wish I had that kind of skill right now, especially on this one song. I may have to be calling you guys soon. But go on.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I realize that, well, there's not a lot of low mids in this certain section, and because we're only, so maybe the guitars need to take up that, or actually maybe the vocal does. And so maybe I have a little more low mids in the vocals than I usually do, where it just kind of fills up that center just a little bit more.
Sure.
And I played with the delays. I played with the delays on his vocal, where I made sure that the trail offs on some of the ends were making it happen, and I made sure that the reverb was another thing that really fit the track. I didn't overpower his vocal. I didn't make it sound like he was in some sort of church in the back of the hall singing. But at the same time, it made his voice bigger and filled up a space in between the two guitars. Because I got the guitars, panned fairly left-right heavy. So that leaves a huge hole in the center just for vocal.
Sure. Yeah.
So something's got to fill that up. And
right.
And that was the vocal.
Oh wow! So I wish I could watch you do that.
So what I made sure happened was, and I'll tell you some of the things I did. Some of the things I did was, I compressed and EQ'd the vocal first, which is fairly easy. Kind of like what you would always do. And then I used the R compressor. You ever use the R vocal compressor? The Wave.
I keep hearing about it though. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I don't use Waves much. I use Isotope stuff for vocals.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a push compressor. But anyway, the nice thing about the R box is that it limits the vocal, brings up a lot of the qualities of vocal, and especially the low mids. It brings up the low mids in the vocal, which you have to be careful about. In some songs, you want to have, after that R box, you have to notch down those low mids because it just muddies up the joint, and you want to get rid of that.
Sure.
But on this particular song, I actually really wanted to emphasize that. I wanted he's kind of got a baritone-ish, not really super low baritone, but kind of it's somewhere in between a tenor and a baritone sound in his voice. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to kind of emphasize that, and I wanted that to fill in that. I wanted to fill that hole in between the two acoustic guitars that are kind of, between the two speakers and sounding so pretty. Mm-hmm. So
Well, cool. That's an interesting way to go about it. So you knew that this compressor emphasized those low mids, and if you used it on the voice, it would kind of fill in that gap a little bit.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And it raises up the whole thing to where it keeps it a very sustained, kind of keeps his vocal in a certain, in your face feeling, and with filling out the middle area at the same time. So,
yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I won't keep you too much longer, but I wanted to ask if you had any, what are your 3 go-to pieces of gear when you're tracking?
When I'm tracking, tracking vocals, I think the 3 most important pieces of gear to me on tracking vocals is your mic pre, and your whatever compressor you're using.
So what are your faves on those?
My very favorite is the Sony 800G microphone, which is a very versatile microphone for vocals for multiple genres. And then I love the 1073 mic pre to record that with, the Neve 1073. And then on the compressor, that's one of the ones that kind of varies for me. It depends on what the project is. If I'm doing something that's like rap, I want something that has a little bit more of a hard knee compressor. So I love the 160, not the 160X, but the DBX 160. And that hits the vocals just right, just kind of tops off the very top, just whatever's just hard, hits it nicely.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I was just curious what you used for tracking.
Yeah, so we talked about when I was doing, the rappers, I would like a little bit of a harder knee compressor, something that is like the DBX 160. If I'm using, doing someone, softer, we're talking like an R&B vocalist of some sort, I would typically like an LA2A or a Summit, and the Summit compressor is kind of acts the same way as the LA2A, only it's just kind of a little bit more reliable. It's just more of one of those gentle compressions,
I see.
And then for rock stuff, I really enjoy an 1176 sort of compression.
Okay.
For rock vocals. So so what really changes when I record vocals the most is the compressor. The second thing that changes the most is the mic itself. As I said, I love the Sony 800, but there's plenty of mics out there that I really love to capture vocals with. Everything from on rock vocals in SM7 to on a lush, lovely vocal, a U47. There's a lot of different variables depending on the artist.
Sure.
Where I would use a vocal, but I would say one of the most reliable and just easy ones is you don't know what's going on that day, and you have to record vocals, but you're not sure what the hell is going to go on. You throw up that Sony 800G, it's that works.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then lastly, for as far as mixing gear, once you've captured the vocals, what are your go-to plugins or outboard gear for mixing vocals?
Yeah, for mixing. Interestingly enough, I'm a minimalist. I really like the Focusrite compressor and EQs, the Red series.
Oh, okay.
So I tend to use those a lot. This one, I always grab them for a compressor, and usually when I'm doing vocals, I would say almost 9.9 times out of 10, I'm at a 4.1 compression ratio, and I'm just kind of really tapping the vocal down. I'm not really doing anything crazy with it.
I see.
Never do I do anything too crazy with the vocal unless it's really required as a part of the production. It's it needs to be a very pushed sounding vocal or some sort of, very in your face vocal. And then there's something you really got to do, with some sort of limiting that, whether it's the 1176 on Crush. Have you ever used that? You ever done that where you push in all the buttons on 1176?
No, I don't dare.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's one of the greatest things you ever do in your life. All the ratio buttons. You can do it on Waves, and I think pretty much anybody who's kind of done the 1176 as a plugin, you can do it. But you can push in all the ratio buttons, right? Usually you hit the Apple button or whatever, your control button, and all the ratio buttons, and they all go in at once. And what happens, it just becomes this really hard limiting compressor, which just really accents every little bit of the vocal, you know, from the breaths to the, you know, to the saliva coming off the teeth to, you know, whatever you want to hear. And it just really pulls it all out. And it's just one of those things that, you know, rock guys were doing back in the day when you really literally on the actual hardware, we would do the same thing. And it wasn't ever meant to work that way. It just happened that it did work that way.
Right.
You know, and
interesting.
And they figured out that, like, oh, hey, look, if we push in all the ratios, it just comes to this really hard limiting compressor. How awesome. And it became a sound, you know.
Kind of it became an effect then.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of not too far off from the sound that, I don't know if you're very familiar with the distressors, but the Nuke does on the distressor.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I kind of know what you mean then.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with the Nuke sound on the distressor, the 1176 does a very similar sound with all the buttons pushed in. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. Oh, dude, thank you so much for chatting and sharing your knowledge, man.
It's my pleasure. I hope I didn't ramble on too much for you.
Not at all. I'm sorry it went so long. I meant to only keep it under 30 minutes, but I was just too interested in hearing what you're going to say. Oh, but I really, really appreciate it. And if you have any final thoughts for guys coming up as an artist or engineer, what would be your one, like, think about this?
That's an interesting one. I think for me, it's, you know, understand the history, understand what it took other people to get to where you're at, and understand where you're at, you know, in relationship, because you want to understand the guy before his plight and what he went through to get where he's at, so that you can relate to him and it somehow have that same conversation of how you're doing it, you know. And it's because it's different now.
Sure.
You know, it's not the way I came up is not the way the guys now are coming up, but
right.
It's also them understanding that, oh, I get that you had to clean toilets for 6 months, and that was one of the things that you did to make sure that you got to this position. And not that I think, you know, that anybody needs to clean toilets to get to where they need to be. I just think that just kind of understanding history and understanding the way that things worked and the way that things work now. And, and you know, and guys in my position, I think we needed to, you know, also be cognitive of how things work now. And realize that things didn't work like they did when we came up through.
Right.
You know,
it's changing.
It's changed, you know, so
fast, yeah.
Exactly. So we have to be cognitive of that and make sure that we're meeting these guys in the middle, you know, and make sure that,
sure,
you know, and that's why I think you talked about Dave Pensato's, web series. I think something that's so important about Dave Pensato's web series is that he's doing something that I got when I came up through the system. I got Dave Pensato's mentorship because I was Dave Pensato's assistant engineer. You know, I was there sitting in the room watching Dave mix stuff, and Dave every once in a while would throw me a bone and say, "Hey, Steve, why don't you, look at this Rhodes or look at this string section." Things that technically Dave usually hated to do, but he would say things that, you know, like that, and you'd be like, "Hey, why don't you look at those things? And is there something that you would, you know, like to do to those?" And then I got to play around with them, you know, and that was my experiment. That was my experimental phase. And so Dave having this show allows people to go back to their bedroom and experiment with the things that he's showing them. You know, and he's, you know, and that's what I think is so important about that show is that he's really just passing on the baton of some sort of mentorship. And it used to be that the mentorship happened in the studio, you know, and it was something that happened, you know, in a big facility. You know, now it happens over the web in your bedroom.
and
right,
and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, you know, and that's it's absolutely the way it should be happening right now. But you know, there's very few guys that have kind of grabbed onto that, and I think Dave is one of the guys that grabbed onto it early, which was fantastic, and kind of spread that love. You know what I mean? And it's one of the great things about his show, you know, and it's really kind of a cool thing. And the funny thing is, like, the rest of us, the rest of us old engineers are like kicking ourselves in the ass. Why didn't we think of that? That was an awesome idea.
Yeah, no kidding. You know, it's really taken off.
Yeah, and it was just, you know, it was a brilliant idea, and I really, you know, I commend Dave on actually doing that and making that happen.
Yeah. So. Well, you know, in that spirit, I'm just so thankful to take the stuff I've learned and share it with people that are coming up under me. I mean, I'm not that far down the road yet, but there's some people that I come in contact with that they're fooling around with GarageBand, or they're fooling around with, you know, guitar in a multi-track recorder on their phone, and they just need a little bit of advice to keep their dream alive or whatever. And I have just kind of fallen in love with those people of trying to be able to share what I know and avoid some of the pitfalls I made with gear and with techniques.
Right.
And say, hey, you know, save yourself some money. Don't go down that route or whatever. And honestly, all that is very much because of Dave Pensato's Place. I mean, the Pensato's Place show has inspired me to share those things, because I even in my day job, I'm always told, you know, keep your knowledge to yourself, because it's job security, especially in the, you know, the avionics engineering world, which is what I do for my job.
Right.
And unfortunately, it creates an atmosphere that's pretty stale and not very fun to be around, very competitive. And I love that Dave is kind of asking people to kind of change that and say, no, let's share what we know. And the people that are really good are not going to be that affected by that anyway, because they're going to rise to the top.
I think the fun thing with Dave is he's you know, on a daily basis, Dave's learning something. You know,
I know.
And I think Dave will be the first one to admit that. He'd be like, you know, I never really thought about using that piece of gear that way. You know, and that's kind of the wonderful thing about, you know, art in general. But if we're talking, you know, more specifically to what we do and engineering, there's really no right and wrong way, right? It's just the way that makes it sound good, right? So did you make it sound good that way? Well, that was the right way. Yes.
Yeah.
Way to go. You did it right.
Way to go. It's that easy. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so, you know, I can boast my degree in music and blah, blah, blah. You know, I can say, oh, but I've been doing this for 20 years and I got a degree in music, but that really doesn't mean anything. You know, it's just, you know, what I do every day is that, you know, if I can do what I do and you know, I'm fortunate enough to work with someone so talented, and I get to learn a little bit something from that person. And like, oh, wow, look at that. That was awesome. I got to try something like that later.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much, Steve. Really, really, really appreciate it. And I'll be sending your Red Lobster gift card to you right away.
Yeah, don't worry about the Red Lobster gift card. But if you're in town, I'd love to take you to Red Lobster. I'm not sure exactly where one is, to be honest with you. We'll have to find one, but we'll find one.
We'll do Sizzler instead.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, no problem.
All right, man.
Now, well, you have a great night. I appreciate it.
All right, take it easy.
Talk to you later, buddy.
All right, late.
Bye-bye. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. I know I did. Big thanks to Steve B. I really, really appreciate you giving me your time. And guys, check out his website, nextlevelmastering.com. I have it in the show notes below. And stay frosty, keep writing, and as always, peace in the Middle East. Even though I don't always say that, but as always, peace.